The first thing Marguerite heard when she walked into the Harlow Grand was her sister's laugh. She knew that laugh. She'd grown up with it, the way it started high and tapered off into something sharp, something that was always just slightly aimed. Across the ballroom, through the chandelier light and the sound of a string quartet playing something no one was actually listening to, Celeste's laugh cut through all of it and found her like it always had, like it had a compass set to her chest. Marguerite stopped just inside the entrance and took it in. The gold and ivory of the room, the women in gowns that probably cost more than her car, the men standing in clusters with drinks held loosely, the way everyone seemed to know exactly where to put their hands. And there was Celeste at the center of a small orbit near the champagne table, radiant in a wine-colored dress that their father had bought her, gesturing toward the entrance, toward Marguerite, with a flute of something sparkling. The man beside her turned to look, then the woman beside him, then a few others. Marguerite was wearing a dress she'd bought at a consignment shop on Granville 3 years ago. It was navy blue and it fit fine. It had always fit fine. But fine was not what this room was built for, and she understood immediately, the way you understand cold when you step outside without a coat, that she had made a mistake coming here. She hadn't wanted to come. She'd told her father that twice, but her father had said, "Celeste asked for you specifically," and that had been that, because when Celeste asked for something, the family moved. Marguerite moved. She crossed the room without letting herself look down at her shoes. "You came." Celeste said it like a surprise, even though she'd been the one to call. She reached out and touched Marguerite's arm just briefly, 2 fingers, the way you'd touch something you weren't sure about. "I wasn't sure you'd be able to find anything to wear." The women beside her smiled politely. One of them looked away. Marguerite said, "The invitation didn't have a dress code." "No, it didn't." Celeste took a sip of her champagne. "I just meant, you know how it is. You're always so busy with your little spreadsheets." Little spreadsheets. Marguerite had been working as a forensic accountant for 6 years. She'd spent the last 4 months buried in the financials of a Vancouver logistics company that had been quietly siphoning funds through 3 subsidiary shell accounts in the Caymans. She'd found every thread. But yes, little spreadsheets. "I'll get a drink," Marguerite said. She turned before her face could do anything she'd have to apologize for. The bar was at the far end of the room, past a row of high tables where guests stood eating things off tiny plates. Marguerite didn't take a plate. She waited at the bar and asked for sparkling water, and stood with her back to the room and breathed. The Harlow Grand was one of those places that existed in Vancouver like a held note. Grand, expensive, quietly hostile to anyone who hadn't been here before. The annual fundraising gala for the Harlow Foundation drew the kind of guest list that included people whose names appeared on buildings rather than donor plaques. Marguerite was here because her father was a mid-level procurement manager for one of the event's corporate sponsors, and Celeste had decided, for reasons Marguerite still didn't fully understand, that she wanted her here. She sipped her water. Across the room, Celeste laughed again. Marguerite set her glass down on the bar. She didn't let herself think about the drive home she'd taken 2 hours, the leftover rice in her fridge, the report she still had to finish by Thursday. She didn't let herself think about the fact that she'd ironed this dress twice before leaving because she'd wanted to get it right, and it still hadn't been right enough. She picked up her water again. That was when she noticed the man at the other end of the bar. He wasn't holding a drink. He was standing with his weight on one side, watching the room with the detached, particular attention of someone who wasn't here to enjoy himself. He was older. Mid-40s, maybe, dark jacket, no tie, a grey that was just beginning to come in at his temples. There was a scar that started below his left ear and disappeared below his collar. He had the hands of someone who had done things they wouldn't repeat in polite company. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the room the way accountants look at balance sheets, looking for what didn't add up. Marguerite recognized the expression. She wore it often enough herself. She looked away. She did not look back. She lasted 20 more minutes before Celeste found her near the dessert table and said, In front of 4 people Marguerite didn't know. "You know what your problem is? You look like you're waiting for a bus." She said it affectionately. That was the worst part. She always said it affectionately, like the meanness was so natural she didn't have to sharpen it first. "You're at a party, Marguerite. Try to look like you want to be here." "I don't want to be here," Marguerite said. Celeste laughed, and the 4 people laughed too, uncertain whether it was a joke. Marguerite put down her plate. She needed air. There was a set of glass doors on the far side of the room that opened to a terrace, and she aimed for them without looking at anyone, weaving through the clusters of guests, past the string quartet, past a man on his phone, speaking low and fast in what sounded like Italian, and she pushed through the doors and stepped outside and let the November air hit her like a correction. The terrace was almost empty. 2 men stood at the far end, speaking quietly. A woman was alone near the railing with a phone to her ear. Marguerite went to the opposite railing, set her hands on the stone, and looked out at the city. Vancouver at night was doing too much. All that light off the water, all that geometry. She heard the door behind her open. She didn't turn. Footsteps on stone, slow, someone who walked like they had no reason to hurry. The footsteps stopped a few feet to her left. A lighter clicked. She glanced sideways. The man from the bar was lighting a cigarette, his eyes on the city, his profile angled away from her. She looked back at the water. "They seat you at the wrong table," he said. His voice was low. He didn't look at her when he said it. "I wasn't at a table," Marguerite said. "I was just standing there." He took a drag, let it out slowly. "You look like you're doing math." She almost laughed. The sound surprised her. She covered it with a breath. "I'm always doing math. Bad habit. It's my job." He turned slightly, enough to look at her. His eyes were dark, and there was something in them that wasn't quite interest, more like assessment. The kind of look that takes inventory. "And what does the math say," he said, "about this room?" Marguerite looked back through the glass doors. The ballroom from here was all light and movement, everyone arranged in their careful groupings. She tracked it the way she tracked any document, looking for patterns, irregularities, things that didn't belong. "Someone's skimming," she said. "Not from the foundation, from the sponsorship pool, probably through a third-party vendor that doesn't actually exist." He was quiet for a moment. "Based on," he said, "the program lists 14 corporate sponsors. The event decor, just the florals and the linens, would run between 40 and 60,000. But the layout is off for that budget. The staging is being done by an outside company, not in-house, which bumps the total. Either the foundation is paying about 30% above what makes sense, or someone is pulling that margin and calling it logistics." She paused. "Or I'm wrong." He took another drag. "Look at her." "You're not wrong," he said. Marguerite turned to look at him fully. He had that stillness that some people have, the kind that isn't calm exactly, but control. Like everything underneath was moving fast, and none of it was getting out. "Who are you?" she said. "Harlow," he said. And then, after a beat, "Most people don't get that far." The foundation, his foundation, she felt the specific cold of having said something out loud that she should have kept to herself. "I didn't mean," she started. "No," he said. "You meant exactly what you said." He crushed the cigarette on the railing and pocketed what was left of it, a reflex, unconscious. He looked at her like he was reading fine print. "What's your name?" "Marguerite Sands." "Who are you here with?" "My father, my sister." A pause. "Celeste Sands. She works for one of your sponsors. Or my father does." "Procurement." "It doesn't matter. Forensic accounting. Private." She kept her voice level. "I audit financial irregularities. Mostly for litigation, sometimes for fraud prevention." Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, the absence of something that had been there before. "Come inside," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an order either, quite. It was the kind of sentence that assumed compliance without demanding it, and Marguerite noticed that, filed it away, and followed him anyway, because the alternative was going back in there and standing near the dessert table until Celeste found another way to make her disappear. He opened the door, and she walked through first, and when she came back into the room, it was different. She understood that immediately. even if she couldn't have explained how. People noticed him. She could see it happen, a kind of ripple, the way a room registers a shift in pressure. Eyes moved without moving, obviously. Conversations adjusted their volume. Someone near the champagne table straightened their jacket. Celeste was 20 feet away. She turned when Marguerite walked in, that reflexive tracking she'd always done, and her expression went through three things very fast: surprise, calculation, something that might have been uncertainty. Harlow was behind Marguerite. He didn't touch her. He just walked with her, and that was enough. Celeste took a step toward them. Harlow glanced at her once, the same inventory-taking look he'd given Marguerite on the terrace, and then looked away. Cleanly, completely, the way you set down something you've already assessed and don't need to pick back up. He looked at Marguerite instead. "My assistant is at the third table," he said quietly. "She'll get your information. I'll have someone contact you Monday about an engagement." He paused. "If you're interested." "In finding your leak," Marguerite said. "In doing your job," he said. "You'd be doing it for me." She should have said she'd think about it. She should have asked about terms, about confidentiality, about scope. She should have said a number of sensible things that she thought of. Only later, on the drive home, the lights of the bridge going over her, like a metronome. Instead, she said, "All right." He nodded once, moved away into the room, and the room adjusted again as he moved through it, and Marguerite stood there in her consignment shop dress and watched him go. Celeste appeared at her shoulder. "What was that?" she said. "He offered me a job." Celeste turned to look at her. "You were outside for 5 minutes. I know. That's Marguerite. Do you know who that is? Harlow. His name is on the building." Celeste's mouth opened. She looked toward where he'd gone. She looked back. She had that expression she got sometimes, just briefly, before she replaced it with something else, the expression of someone recalculating something they'd been certain of. "That's not what I meant," she said. Marguerite picked up a glass from a passing tray. This time she took the champagne. "I know what you meant," she said. "I'll see you at dinner on Sunday." She crossed the room without hurrying, found the third table, found the assistant, gave her name and her card, and finished her champagne near a window that faced the water. She thought about the numbers. She thought about what Harlow had looked like when she'd said someone's skimming. The fact that it hadn't surprised him had only confirmed something he'd been carrying for a while. She thought about the way the room had moved when he walked through it. She was in the elevator going down when her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The vendor is called Orion Event Solutions. Registered in 2021. You won't find a physical address. She stared at it for a long time. The elevator opened to the lobby. She walked out into the night and stood on the sidewalk with her phone in her hand and the November air doing its usual thing, sharp and salt and wet, and she thought, "I already checked. There's no Orion Event Solutions in any provincial registry she had access to. There's no GST number. There's nothing." She texted back, "I know. I checked that before I came inside. The response took 11 seconds. Monday, 9 a.m. I'll send the address." She put her phone in her bag. On the drive home, she turned the radio off and drove in silence, running the numbers without a spreadsheet, doing it the way she'd always done it. Just the architecture of it, just the bones, the structure of where money went when it wanted to disappear. She had been doing this for 6 years, and she knew the ways of it, the way a shell company exhaled, the way a false invoice held its breath, the way you could bleed a fund dry if you were patient enough and careful enough, and had just enough legitimate noise around you to make the signal hard to find. Someone inside the Harlow Foundation was patient and careful, and had been making noise for, she guessed, without the documents, at least 3 years. She pulled up to her building and sat in the car for a minute. She thought about Harlow's face when he'd said, "You're not wrong, not pleased, exactly." Something more like recognition. The particular thing that happens when someone finds, in an unexpected place, someone who reads the same language they do. She went upstairs. She ate leftover rice. She opened her laptop and worked for 2 hours and went to bed. She did not think about how the room had been different when she walked back into it beside him. She did not think about the look on Celeste's face. She thought about Orion Event Solutions and the ghost of a GST number and the specific way that fraudulent vendors tended to leave fingerprints in the payroll. Small, but there, she thought. Monday. She sent 3 emails before 9 and arrived at the address he'd sent. A building in Gastown, stone and glass, no name on the exterior, at 8:52, because she was never late. A man in a dark jet met her at the lobby and walked her to the 4th floor and into a room that was not quite an office. There was a table. There were files. There was a coffee that appeared without her asking for it, black, which she hadn't specified, which told her something. Harlow was already there when she walked in. He was standing at the window. He had a coffee too, and he looked like a man who had been awake for longer than the morning. There were lines around his eyes that she hadn't caught in the ballroom lighting. The scar below his ear looked older in the daylight. He turned when she came in. "Sands," he said. "Harlow," she said. There was a beat, just a beat, where something adjusted between them, some calibration. He moved away from the window, and she sat down and pulled the first file toward her, and they began. He told her what he knew, which was more than he'd told anyone else, and she understood immediately why he'd chosen to tell it to her, not because of Sunday night, not because of the terrace, but because he needed someone who could read the documents without him having to translate. Someone who wouldn't hear fraud and think in headlines, who would hear fraud and start looking for the shape of it. The leak was inside the Foundation's finance committee. Someone with access to vendor approvals and payment authorization. Someone who had been, by the look of the documentation, exceptionally good at being boring. The amounts were never large enough to trigger an audit flag. The timing was always during periods of high event spend. The vendor invoices were internally consistent, down to the watermark on the letterhead. It was, Marguerite thought, very good work. She said so. Harlow looked at her steadily. "That bother you? The quality of it?" She set the invoice down. "No, it just means I have to go deeper than the surface. Which is fine. That's what I do." He watched her. She was aware of it the way you're aware of a sound you can't quite identify, present, slightly unclassifiable. "How long?" he said. 3 weeks. Maybe 4. Depends what I find in the payroll records. She looked up at him. "I'll need everything. Not just what you've already pulled. I'll need access to the full accounts payable system, all vendor communications for the last 5 years, and the committee meeting minutes. The minutes are sealed. Then unseal them." Another one of those beats. "Most people don't talk to me like that," he said. "Most people aren't trying to do a job for you," she said. "If you want the work done correctly, I need the documents. If you want someone to handle you carefully, I'm the wrong person for this." The silence lasted long enough that she started calculating an exit. Not a physical one, just the shape of it, how you end an engagement before it begins, how you preserve the professional record. He said, "I'll have the minutes by Wednesday." She nodded, pulled the next file. They worked for 3 hours. She took notes in her own shorthand, the cramped, illegible kind she'd been writing since university, the kind no one else could read. He answered her questions flinching, even the ones that had edges. "When did you first notice? Who else knew you suspected? Have you spoken to the committee members individually?" At noon, he said, "There's lunch. I'm fine. It's not a question." She looked up. He was already moving toward the door. She followed him to a smaller room with a table set for 2, food that someone had prepared without fanfare. Sandwiches, cut precisely, a soup she didn't catch the name of. She sat down because it seemed the path of least resistance. He sat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Your sister," he said. "Does she know what you do?" "She knows the title. She calls it spreadsheets." He made a sound, not quite a laugh, more like the idea of one. "My brother used to do that," he said. Whatever I was doing, it was smaller when he said it back. Marguerite looked at him. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the soup or somewhere near it. "Used to," she said. "He's gone." No particular inflection, a fact, like a line item. 3 years ago. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She had a feeling he'd heard it enough. Instead, she said, "Is that when the skimming started?" He looked up at her. Something moved through his expression, not offended, something more complicated, like a door that opened and was immediately thought better of. Within the year, he said. She nodded, filed it, went back to her sandwich. After a moment, he said, "You're not going to say anything about that?" "About the timing," she considered. "It tells me it's probably someone who knew your attention would be elsewhere, someone who'd been waiting for a window. That narrows the candidate pool." She looked at him. "Did you know that, or did you not want to know it?" He was quiet for a long time. "Both," he said. She picked up her water. "All right." They ate without talking for a few minutes, and it wasn't uncomfortable, which surprised her. She wasn't often comfortable with silence in rooms with other people. She was comfortable with it now. Outside the window, Gastown did its lunchtime thing, the sound of it coming up faint and distant through the glass. "The vendor," she said. "Orion. There will be a natural person behind it. These things always have a natural person. Someone who had to sign something somewhere. I know when I find them. What happens to them?" He looked at her. It wasn't a menacing look. It was measured, specific. "That," he said carefully, "is not your department." "I'm not asking permission," she said. "I'm asking so I know what I'm walking into." He set down his water glass. He had that stillness again, the kind that costs something to maintain. "Nothing happens to them," he said, "until I know everything. When I know everything." He stopped. Looked at the table. "They'll be handled." Handled. The word did a lot of work. Marguerite thought about the kind of man who owned a building, who had a scar below his ear, who moved through a ballroom like a change in atmospheric pressure, who'd been grieving a brother for 3 years and hadn't let anyone see it clearly enough to use it. She thought about what handled meant and decided, for now, that it wasn't her department. "All right," she said. "You keep saying that," he said, "because it keeps being true." She finished her water. "I'll have a preliminary report by Friday." Preliminary, not conclusions, just the shape of it. He nodded. She gathered her things. At the door she stopped and turned, and he was still sitting at the table, watching her go. "The reason the pattern started after your brother died," she said. "It's not just opportunity. It's also, whoever it is, they knew you well enough to know you'd pull back. To know you'd be distracted." She paused. "That means it's someone close." His jaw shifted, just slightly. "I know," he said. "I know you know," she said. "I'm just saying it out loud so it stops being the thing we're working around." She left. On the elevator down, she let her hands unclench and looked at the ceiling and thought, "I should not be doing this. Not for the money. The money was substantial, more than she'd earned in a quarter, and she was not naive about why the number was that size. But that wasn't it. It wasn't that. It was the way he'd said both. Both knowing and not wanting to know. The way someone who managed everything still had the one thing he couldn't quite look at directly. She understood that. She had a sister who aimed at her in public, and a father who let her, and a job she was very good at, and a life that was organized and alone. And she was good at looking at everything directly except the particular question of whether it had been a choice. She went home. She opened the files. By Wednesday she had 3 candidates. By Thursday she had 2. By Friday she sat across from Harlow again in the Gastown office, the preliminary report in front of him, and said, "It's your finance director." He was very still. "His name is on the vendor registration," she said, "under his mother's maiden name. The signing authority was delegated through a committee revision in 2021. I can show you the minutes. The amendment is on page 47. It looks routine unless you're looking for it. The payments go out on the last business day of each quarter. There's a 3-day lag before they land, which means there's a holding account somewhere, probably offshore, probably flagged as a consulting retainer." She paused. "I can find the holding account. I need 2 more weeks." She waited. "Marcus Veld," he said. Finally. "Yes. He's been with the foundation for 11 years. "I know." She kept her voice even. "The length of tenure is probably why it took this long for anyone to notice." He understood the audit cycle. He knew the thresholds. She looked at him. "Harlow." He looked up. "He started within 8 months of your brother's death," she said, "and the amounts have been increasing annually. I think he expected it to never come to light. I think," she stopped, "I think he expected you to be too far inside your own grief to look." The room was very quiet. Something crossed his face that she didn't try to name. "Find the account," he said. "I will." He stood, walked to the window. She let him have the silence. She was good at that, letting silence do what it needed to do without filling it. After a while he said without turning, "You came back." She looked at him. "What?" "The gala. You came in, and your sister said whatever she said, and you got a drink and you went outside, and I thought you were going to leave." He turned then, and there was something different in his expression, something that wasn't quite the inventory-taking look, something more direct. "You didn't. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction," Marguerite said. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "No," he said. "I don't think you would." She picked up her bag. 2 weeks. "I'll have the account, Sands." She stopped. "When this is finished," he said, and then he stopped too, like he was working out the shape of what he was going to say before he said it. She waited. "You told me," he said carefully, "that you're not the person to handle someone carefully." "That's right. I'd like to know," he said, "if that applies generally, or only professionally." The room did something. Pressure shifted. The light came through the window at the same angle it had all week. Nothing changed, and something changed. She looked at him steadily. He looked back. Neither of them looked away. "That," she said, "is a question for when the work is done." He held her gaze for a moment longer. 2 weeks, then," he said. 2 weeks. She walked out. The elevator opened immediately, like it had been waiting. She stepped in and the doors closed, and she stood there in the mirrored light and let herself breathe. 2 weeks. She already knew what she'd find.